Thank you. So great to be up here talking about a couple of topics that people have huge curiosity about, what really happens inside the boardroom and what's going on with innovation in the boardroom. So Virginia has so much direct experience at that, that it's great to be with you today. We have lots to talk about, and also we want to hear from the audience. So we'll definitely, we'll go through a round of questions, but we'll definitely want to take Q&A. So take notes on things you'd like to ask us about. So just to set the stage, Virginia, why don't you talk a little bit about, what is the role of the board in general? Because oftentimes there's people just want to understand that better, and that's important context for then talking about innovation in the boardroom. So what on earth does a board do?
Okay, so I'll start out just so you get a little bit of context. It is true that I have sat on over 20 public company boards, as well as numerous private companies, early and mid-stage. And when I started out, I was the first female board director. This is 35 years ago. I was a child then, as you can imagine. But I was the first female board director. Eventually, when people said, oh, it's not so bad, maybe we'll take another one. But my evolution as being an individual director to becoming chairs of major committees on the boards, to now being chair of the board of a $12 billion tech company, which has quadrupled its market cap since I took over as board chair. So, which is no single easy feat, I can assure you. Many people don't realize that actually the buck starts and stops at the board level. The board hires and fires the CEO and plays the number one job of the board is to make sure that the company has an incredible strategy. Without strategy and culture and team and all these other things, but if you do not have a strategy, these companies flounder. And so a lot of work gets done in composing the complementary but diverse set of voices around the table at the board level, and then assigning chairs of committees, because that's where a lot of the work gets done. So many people, when they, look at companies from afar, they're always, even the analysts who are writing about the companies or the investors, often will overlook who's sitting on the board. And I can say that probably before 07 and 08, when the big meltdown occurred worldwide in the mortgage crisis, not a lot of people paid attention to who's sitting on the board level. Because in those days, it was a little bit of the tail wagging the dog, right? The CEO would pick sort of the board members. But that's when governance really kicked up its game, and the light started to shine on board directors and the composition. It has continued to evolve since that time, and I'm happy to say that it is, infinitely better than it was. Not to say that we don't have a long way to go, but it is continuing in its journey in maturity and evolution. But a lot of times shareholders will ultimately realize when they start to have a conversation with board members, usually chair or chairs of committees, that, wow, we really do need to start looking at the composition of this board and how they are leading the company through its journey.
Yeah, and on that note, a lot of focus in the last few years on increasing the diversity on boards, and sometimes I think it's, and this is my perception as an outsider, it's box checking, and sometimes there's a real serious recognition that actually having more diverse perspectives on the board is helpful. What are you seeing?
Well, one of the things that the boards do every year is a major strategic offsite. And when the strategy is set, the number one priority is to set up what we call a board matrix. And on the board matrix is a set of competencies that they need around the table to achieve those goals. Some public companies publish those matrices. In fact, in the UK, it's pretty much mandatory that you do publish that. Here in the US, it is not mandatory, it's at your discretion. And so when you have that board matrix, then you begin to revisit at your board level, because we now have moved from multi-year voting to annualized voting for board directors to ensure that you have the right voices around the table.
Right. So considering the increasing importance and complexity of the conversation around technology that I imagine is taking place in the boardroom, and we'll get into details about that, how's that affecting the matrix? And I don't know if you can get specific about that at all, but I'm sure for an audience of technology leaders, that would be of a lot of interest.
Yes, and I think it varies industry by industry. Obviously, if you're in the tech industry, you're going to have a lot of people on your board that have a tech background, but of various focused skill sets. In other industries, there has started to be a movement. There's at least one technologist on the board of most industries, which again is not enough. For a while, when cybersecurity became such an issue, which it still is today, there was always this thought, oh, every board's going to have a CISO. And that didn't happen. And every board's, now got to have an AI specialist, et cetera. And it did or did not happen depending upon what industry you're in. So I think that also what's happening as individuals like you, and maybe in the last 10 years, through this program, we've had people who were also non-technologists come and spend time. So I would say the younger board members have an understanding of how to use technology, how important it is, how powerful it is, and in some ways it's a secondary skill set for them. So there are, in a lot of ways, on the matrice you will see that there's more than one person that has a technological aspect to their background. So again, it's still not where I think we should be, but all of us are in the trenches fighting the good fight.
Yeah. Okay, great. So you mentioned that, the boards, one of their primary roles, if not their primary role, is to hire or evaluate and fire the CEO if necessary. What does the board really need from management? What do they look for in the management team? And how do you make that a good relationship?
Well, here's the really fun thing about boards, and when you sit on more than one, you really get to know all the different cultures. Some cultures have designed a board that has really, really advanced skills in areas that they really need to continue to grow in their business model and grow as a company. And so, for example, I was on the board of JetBlue right post-IPO, right? And so that CEO and subsequent CEOs were very happy to actually assign each board member the ability to work with various teams within management. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times management doesn't realize that the board is their resource to use. And so talking to your CEO, who is also on the board, about, hey, I noticed, so-and-so has this skill set and I'm really struggling with this. Would I be able to talk to Dave or Virginia or Matt or whoever it is about that? And so boards really want to be able to engage with management and one level down or two levels down. Oftentimes boards will have dinners before the board meeting, and we will invite multi-level leadership to those board dinners. I know one of the things I always do is I will assign a board member a table. Each board member has a table, and then we will bring 2 or 3 levels of management and have them strategically placed at that board dinner table so that a conversation, a relationship can begin to seed. So I think we hope that management knows that the boards really are here as a resource to you. The challenge can be the gatekeeper is the CEO. And hopefully the CEO feels good and strong enough about the ability for management to have a conversation with board members. I will tell you that Jamie Dimon, in my conversations with him, says that he is open door for anybody in his company, can speak to any board member that they wish at any point in time, in the leadership ranks, of course, and that he doesn't ask that they request his permission. All he wants to know is, did that meeting take place? But that's it. And to me, that is what every CEO should do. Because if you're hiding something from a board member, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and I think I shared with you last week when we were getting ready for this call that I had a client last year where the now former CEO, thankfully, had a very antagonistic relationship with the board and really kept them out of things. And it really harmed the company. The new CEO has spent the better part of a year just restabilizing the company and digging them out of a hole. And it was, you know, his wiring or whatever, and very, very damaging to the company. So what you're suggesting is making me think of a good screening question in career searches. A good question for you to ask as you continue your careers is, you know, try to learn a little bit about, well, what's the relationship of management and the CEO, and is it an open door, and do leaders in the company interact with the board? I mean, that could be sort of a leading indicator
I think
about
so.
the culture and openness and what kind of work environment it is.
And I just want to say one more thing, because I know Alexis and I had this fun conversation and she wanted me to share it with you all. So as you may, and I'll use the JetBlue as an example, as you may know, JetBlue was the first to have live TV in the seat back. And so we did, and years went by, and GoGo came out as a Wi-Fi product in most airplanes. And it was awful. It still is awful. and so at the boardroom, you know, we would get surveys from customers like, when are we going to have Wi-Fi in the plane? And so the board kept pushing, like, let's just, you know, do we want to like buy another company again that does Wi-Fi? Because we did buy that company that did the first live TV. And I was, or maybe we should go to GoGo. And I was like, no, we are never going to GoGo. It was like, our customer service will plummet if that's the case. So my first public board was in the telecom space, and it was an incredible board. One of the founders of Qualcomm was Harvey White. It had the president of Microsoft, and it also had the CFO of Dell. And so I always got together with Harvey White from Qualcomm. Once a year, we'd have dinner, breakfast in New York. And he was sharing with me some work that he was doing of streaming live, you know, streaming broadband over cockpits at the time. And I was like, really? Wow, if you stream over cornfields, can you stream to a cockpit? And he was like, I don't know, we'd have to figure that out. So as a board director, I went to the CEO and I spoke to the chair of the board and I said, hey, listen, like, I think we may be able to do something to get the quality of Wi-Fi in our plane that we have at home. And they were like, okay, do you want to write a white paper on it? I was like, no, but let me put a meeting together and bring in the constituents and we can whiteboard what we can do. And so there I did. I brought in a team from Viasat. Some of you may know Viasat at the time. And our chief commercial officer, who later became the CEO of JetBlue, who's there now, Robin Hayes, and because I knew that he was in charge of everything customer related, right? And talking about building advocacy, right? And so, and then our technology people. And I started to whiteboard out how this, and it turns out we had to, in order to make this happen, we had to punch a hole in every airplane and put an antenna on top. We had to put a Wi-Fi system in place. And we also had to completely revamp the entire safety system of the plane. And so, and we had to launch our own satellite. so you can imagine how the board felt about that. And so they were like, Virginia, we don't launch satellites. I said, no, I know we don't, but we do fly planes, and it is sort of in the same sector. But by the way, I have a student who graduated from the Columbia Master's Program, who that is her job on the West Coast. She launches satellites. So I'm pretty sure we could get a good deal, and we'll be able to make this happen. So you know how long it took me to convince this entire board? It took 3 years. 3 years. Yeah. And it was just relentless. I just had to be relentless because every year it would come up in the strategy and they would be like, we don't do this, we can't punch holes in the airplane. And then finally, when it really meant something to our chief commercial officer and the customers really were at a point, then, you know, again, I revisited the cost with them, but here's a point where a board director gets involved, hence we did. And anytime I fly Mint to the West Coast, I see bankers going, man, we love this Wi-Fi on JetBlue. We only use it when we're closing a deal because it's so fast. So anyway, that's my story about how a board can get involved in innovation.
So I'm sure in strategic advocacy, I'm sure this semester, as my class is muddling through some of the challenges, I will remind them and say, remember, it took Virginia 3 years. So we'll come back to that. But before, I want to move on and talk specifically about innovation in the boardroom. But I just have one more question which your story is provoking. You know, one of the sort of rules of the road on how a board should work with management is this idea of noses in, fingers out. And so it feels like how do you manage that balance? Because when you talk about whiteboarding sessions and meeting with specific proposals and recommending a satellite company, that starts to sound pretty operational. So how do you navigate that line and stay true to it?
Yeah, and I feel very lucky in a lot of ways. One thing I will say, the stage that the company is at does play a role in how involved one can be. So this was an early IPO, still formative in the offering, and they really assembled a board at that time where every single person had a major discipline that was their expertise and difference. And so, you know, we didn't run teams. We're more like facilitators, right? Bringing an idea, bringing a concept. And so every board culture is, and again, we didn't vote like, you know, the board voted. As you can see, I didn't prevail. Right? The board voted. I didn't push my agenda. I didn't have a personal authority to pass something. But I do see, you know, in more companies between the IPO stage and let's say out, it could be 5 to 7 years, right? If you get your board where everyone has a very specific competency to tap and have a conversation about, so that the team can learn about it. I see it happening more and more. Again, the governance of it is different, right? We will evaluate, management puts forth the presentation, the financial plans, and the board votes on these things. But the world is so complex and our management teams are so heads down, and that it's very hard to constantly be looking outside, right? And so who would not want, General Stan McChrystal was on one of my boards, and when he took us to get the Battle of Gettysburg Field and talked about situational awareness, line of sight, again, conceptually, what an incredible experience for the management team to have. So I think, we're not fingers in, but we are influencers, brainstorming partners.
And your guiding strategy, which is a big part of your role.
Strategy is a huge
issue. So let's talk about innovation. What's in the boardroom? What's high on the list? When it comes to innovation in the boardroom, what do the boards care about? What are they focusing on? What do you see on the agenda, for this year? Not just AI. I know, I'm sure AI is out there, but what else? What's on the agenda?
Well, and I'm very fortunate because I am in a circle of people who are board directors in companies like Salesforce. I've personally sat down with Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, myself as chair of a company that works with his team, and many companies. And so it's really good to be able to get a sense of, well, how is, tech company, how are the tech company boards thinking? How are the financial services boards thinking? How are, the aviation or retail industry? And there's no question that AI has it's like a deer in headlights for the board, that they recognize they have to do something, and they want they're urging the teams to come up, what's your plan, what's your AI framework, are you efficiency or innovation driven? That is a panic dimension. And boards tend to go in waves, major topics of conversation. I mean, aside from everything else we deal with, right? Before AI was cybersecurity, and then everyone was panicked about cyber. But now I think the AI as a catalyst shift to strategy. And who am I? Existential issues. Who am I today and who am I going to be tomorrow is probably one of the most important discussions that the board is having right now.
So it's forcing, it's not just about, it's some new technology. It sounds like it's forcing the conversation about strategy, the business model. Why does the company even exist? Why will it exist?
And should we? And I think it'll be interesting because we were in an M&A dearth, and no M&A was happening. But you're starting to see little seeds of M&A now. There was a big deal in the, network space, right? So, and other spaces. So I think you're going to start to see more because those companies that don't feel they have a good strategy are thinking about shareholder return and what do we do and how do we, manage through that very turbulent set of waters ahead.
Yeah. So how do you see boards setting goals for the CEO and the management team so that they can see throughout the course of the year how is their effectiveness at the use of technology and innovation? I mean, boards, I know, they all have their scorecard. They sit down every quarter or every month and look at the scorecard. What's on the scorecard with respect to innovation and technology?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because a lot of times people think the boards don't have metrics, right? Or the only metrics that they have are those that sit on the compensation plan of the senior executives, which that does exist, right? They have usually OKRs or MBOs or at a corporate level, and then as well individual level. But the other thing, because you see such a rapid cadence of change, and we all are feeling it, so are the companies, right? So that every board meeting brings up a project that has to get done, or a series of initiatives that are need to be addressed and not lost. So they will receive a set of metrics that are ongoing metrics related to more issues of the company that are operational, scaling issues, financial issues, and those metrics are quarterly visited, right, in accordance with the overall annual plan. But not losing sight of these things that come up that the team must begin to investigate is essential. So in the last few years, everyone seems to have this list of major projects that get carried over, they get birthed at a board meeting, and then they get funneled down, which is very important for all of you to know that when you get a request for information, right, a lot of times it's coming from way up above and it gets filtered down. And so think for a minute, when you answer that question or gather that information, what is the context in which they want that information? Because it's never in isolation. It may be that your role and your ability to provide that piece of information is more siloed in your mind, but it actually is a piece of a puzzle, which is a larger puzzle. And please feel free to ask your managers or your executive leaders, can you give me a little bit more context about what that is so that I can more appropriately provide that information with some help for you as you are beginning to jettison that information upward. So then those projects become, an aha, okay, now we need some metrics so that we can ensure that those set of projects or programs get launched and are measured. So it is another set of metrics that take place.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. So I want to ask one more question and then open it up for questions. I'm guessing that there's a number of people in the audience who are considering, may see someplace in the future, board service along their career path. So what advice do you have?
This is a question I get asked everywhere I go. And I answer it always in this way. First of all, everyone sort of thinks like sitting on a board is, and I know, and I'm going to ask Amy, because we talked about this, right? Is like, wow, how awesome. Either, wow, I'm going to get to focus on strategy, or I'm going to get to, get paid a lot of money and just go to 4 meetings a year. No. It's a lot of work. I mean, if you want, first of all, I don't encourage you to join a board unless you love this company, or you really believe it's undervalued, or you really want to see it soar and it's not there yet, it's broken. I will tell you, the reason I join certain boards is always because I'm passionate about its mission. And that enables me to be a good board director. So, and then it's a lot of work. I mean, you can imagine the board deck, that you get. First of all, you have to sit on at least 1 or 2 committees. And those documents before the board meeting, and the best boards do pre-reads so that when we get to the boardroom, we're having a conversation or a controversial polemic discussion around issues, as opposed to having someone flip through a board deck. And so that amount of reading and a little bit of research on your part, or interacting with the product or the service ahead of time to see what they're thinking about, it's a commitment. It is.
And add on top of that a little crisis.
Oh, God, forget
that
the
creates, you
crises.
know, a hostile offer, an
active
infosec breach,
shareholder.
an angry shareholder. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the rule of thumb on board service is assume at a minimum 200 hours a year for a board.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then, you know, when there's a crisis, you're on a board call every day, every day, and managing through that crisis. And then, you know, in a fairly heated, complex manner with 8 or 9 other people on the board, right? So it's a time commitment. So what I say to you is dip your toe in the water in the sense that, first of all, you have to have some form of a domain expertise that a board is going to need. It's not just, I'm a generic, you know, executive and I want to sit on a board. You have to be sort of a go-to person in the industry that you have built a reputation around. I encourage you to, if you really get past these hurdles that you think about it, is join a nonprofit board. But join a nonprofit board that you look at, of course you care about the mission. Look at that board. Who's on that board? Are they sitting on other boards? Are they on private boards or public boards? And then you could see what it's like. How is that nonprofit governed? Is it good governance, bad governance? Build relationships with people on that board, because a lot of times directors will bring other directors in and say, I had a great experience with this person on this board, because they know how to conduct themselves at the board level, which is very different than being an operating executive. The other is to join boards of small, medium-sized non-public companies to get a sense that are well-run, that you can get a sense of what is the commitment and where do I fit in. You definitely are not a player position because you have to open up, you have to then, let's say I have a marketing background or I'm a financial person or I'm just a pure tech person. You will not be valued on that alone. You have to look at everything. You have to understand financials. You have to understand human capital issues. You have to understand cyber. You have to understand risk management. And you have to play a role and have a voice in all of those. Now, Amy, I know, has had some experience in contemplating boards and came to a conclusion.
I've had experience being the #2 candidate for many board seats, and realized through the process that the right board is out there for me someplace, but it has to be really the right board. I need to be on a board where definitely something that I can be really passionate about, but really importantly, that whole dynamic of the relationship between the CEO and the board, critical. I am not, as you will come to know me, I am not a yes person. I am brutally direct, and always in search of the truth and doing the right thing. And not everybody likes that.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for me to be in that kind of boardroom culture with a CEO who really sees the board as a resource. Been sought out for situations where it was obvious I was the diversity candidate. I find that really offensive. I don't want to be on a board because of my gender. I want to be on a board because I'm valued for who I am. And so, so you have to kind of smoke that out. Really interesting exercise to look if there's ever a board you're interested in is to, and I've done this, is pull up the board member backgrounds and create the board, what you think the board matrix is. So I've done that for board interviews that I've had. I make a chart, board member and background, and then I sort of make, the columns. Well, is there technology background, infosec, risk management, legal, marketing? Ooh, there's no marketing person. Maybe that, maybe they're looking for that. And so you can kind of come up with a matrix, and through a little bit of, this, for public boards, information's all public.
Yeah.
And try to understand, is there even a role that I could play here? What do I bring? So I'd like to open up for questions. I don't know, Art, how much more, do we have time, or are we out of time? We have a little bit of time. Okay. Yes.
Actually, right off of the last statement that you both made, my question would be, how do you calibrate the self-awareness to know if that board isn't meant for you, or there are some gaps in development or experience that you need to adjust to? You've mentioned you've been in Virginia on 1 million boards and that you've grown through that process. And so, how do you calibrate knowing, to Amy's point, this is not for me. I can't be my authentic self on this board, so it's not for me. Or I need to grow and develop a little bit, and maybe that's why it didn't work out.
I feel it's really important to ask a series of questions. First of all, the first indicator is you look at the company and you say, I'm willing to have a conversation. If that first conversation is with the CEO, it's not a good governance situation.
Interesting.
You want to first meet with the chair of Nom and Gov. That chair's job is because if the CEO is getting ahead of the Nom and Gov committee, that's not good. So that's one first thing. Then when you do get to speak to the chair of Nom and Gov, say, can you walk me through, how the board is governed? Do you have a strategic offsite? If so, when is that? If they tell you it's every 2 or 3 years, that's not good. Then you can ask, what are the committees? And what do you think are, the major issues facing the company today? And what would you describe the board culture like? And you can, begin to ask those questions, and you will usually meet the Nom and Gov committee first. That's it. And the CEO is the last person you meet, because it's the board's job, right, to build the right type. It's not the CEO's job. So through those conversations with the Nom and Gov committee, obviously governance is really important. So you really can engage in a conversation about where do you think you are on the, governance maturity model, and engage deeply about, what's the agenda look like? How do you prepare your board materials? Who decides what's on the board agenda? That's also really key. Because if the CEO and leadership team are deciding what the board agenda is, that's not good either, right? So.
Sounds like also there's a good ChatGPT inquiry in your future to list out the questions. Great. Okay, can we take one more, Art? Oh, we have 10 minutes. Oh, okay, hey. Yes. Oh.
So you spoke about how 30 years back you were the first female on the board, right? And my question is kind of related to that. So I have been mostly impacted on the teams. I've been the only female, so worked like in male-dominated industries and etc. What happens during that process? And personally, what I have faced the challenge is that it's difficult to find a mentor or a guide, right? When you're looking for, when you're going through a challenging situation at work in terms of your decision making. A lot of times, even when you feel that you are going in the right direction, but if everybody is not agreeing to you, you start self-doubting yourself and kind of going through that process. You mentioned it took you 3 years to bring everybody on the same page, but 3 years, it sounds right now just a number, but when you go through that period every single day, it's a very different situation what you're going through mentally. So I want to understand how did you navigate that, and what their anchors or sort of people that you sought out, how did you build those relationships and those mentors and benefit and advocate?
Yeah. Well, and first I will tell you, obviously 30 years ago, the concept of diversity on the board was unheard of. So I didn't get put on the board because I was a woman. And I was largely, pretty much never recruited for a board by a recruiting firm. It was always through someone who had worked with me who recommended me. So I feel fortunate in that respect that I knew that I was sitting there because I had a particular expertise in what it was that they needed to have addressed. but I was, in investment banking, I was the youngest and only female partner in a worldwide German bank. So I have met many, many firsts, right? A first or youngest managing director in an investment bank. So the fact that I actually was who had accomplished what I did, right, gave me a sense of comfort that I believed in myself. And I think that's really important for you. I know that, I don't know if you ever grew up in a home where your parents always said no, but I did. So I learned a lot about, okay, no, do I go in this door, or do I go in the back door, or how do I do that, right? So no to me was not a personal attack. No meant, okay, go back to the drawing board, because either they didn't hear you, or they didn't understand, or I needed to change my narrative, or the way I communicated. And I will tell you, one of the most important things that I learned on this entire journey, I would never have become chair of a major tech company if I didn't learn that I had to learn how to alter how I spoke to people and my narrative. And so, but don't give up. You were there because you are there. You had that idea because you are who you are.
Do you want to talk about that a little more? How did you alter your narrative? I think that's a really interesting, profound insight. What did you do?
Yeah.
Like you went from here, it was this, and you went to that. If you're
Yes,
comfortable, Chair, because that's a very personal question.
I think that I arrived thinking that if I shared, here's my opinion, here's what I believe we need to do. And that set up immediately like a counterpoint, right? Point, counterpoint. And when I would get turned down or rebuffed, I didn't make quite the connection that it was because of here's my view, right? So I really had to learn, it's not about Virginia's view. Who cares about my view, right? It's really about why should we do this? And here's why I think we need to do this. From bringing in the research information to being able to supply proof points. And if we don't, again, if we don't do this, then this is what I think, we think might happen to us. And so it took me years to learn that. And
Yep. I think it's a great point, certainly one that I work on a lot because I do have a tendency to tell you what I think, but it's not what I think. And one of the tactics that I've really worked on, and we're actually going to work on this in strategic advocacy too, is the power of how do you bring people to something you're advocating for through the questions that you ask them. So and not leading questions, but they tell you. So the way to open the discussion, it can go a lot better. For example, this is not what I think, or this is what I recommend, but well, what do you think about? And so asking questions to stimulate the dialogue fosters collaboration, and it creates a whole different perception of what you bring to a team. So I don't know if that's
well, it's
that
very
makes sense to
interesting
you.
that you say this, because I was just at a series of meetings last week where they had a gentleman who was the former negotiator for of the FBI for all the hostages in the Middle East over the last 30 years. His name is Chris Voss.
His book is on my reading list. His book is on the reading list for
He
strategic
gives a
advocacy.
master class on this platform called Masterclass. And he talks about how do you get the buy-in from who you're negotiating with, right?
Yeah.
And it was it's fascinating about when the person, you let them speak about why they think this is not a good idea. And he said, actually, the last 3 or 4 words of the sentence that they end with is probably very important. So if you so we talked about mirroring. So if you mirror that, like, well, I really don't think that we should be serving fish on Fridays. really, you don't think we should be serving fish on Fridays? Like a question, and he would say, yes, and here's why. And so I thought, it's worth
It's a great tactic.
Yeah. And a good book to read, I'm sure.
It's as are Warren Berger's books on asking questions. Okay, another question. I think we may have time for one or two more.
So JetBlue, awesome when you guys had those TVs in the thing. I remember flying with you guys in 2000, and I picked you guys just for that TV. So following on from that I feel was a huge differentiator in why I picked to always fly JetBlue because of those TVs. And then you're telling me...
especially if you have kids.
Yeah. I mean, in 2000, I was a lot younger, so...
Right.
Basically, what I found is I picked that, and you're telling me that you guys came up with this brilliant idea to bring internet on board and have this sort of connection and do all of this.
Fly-fi, yeah.
Yeah, fly-fi. Why didn't you do it sooner, like that 3 years? Would you say that's a good thing that the board blocked you for 3 years, and ultimately that was a good thing? Or would you say that, or would you say the wrong
all those
people?
extra customers we could have had,
Yeah,
those bankers flying back and forth, yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. If that's what customers wanted, that was the good thing, you had that idea, would you say that was an inefficient board, and it would have been better had more of like the CEO put his friends in, and his friends, wanted that, and you'd influence the CEO? Would that have been better for the company? And did you kind of lose that first mover advantage that you could have had 3 more years of potentially higher adoption and beating your competitors?
And hence my learning that I just talked about was Virginia changing her narrative. And so originally it was Virginia and her idea, right, about, hey, why don't we do this? And here I thought about this, and it wasn't until I really engaged Robin to get involved, who was the chief commercial officer at the time, to really make it our thing, right? And so, and I will tell you, that change has like I get asked to be on boards now, like constantly. I can only do 4 public and 3 private at a time, right? But that change in how I conduct myself at the board level, and maybe some of that was because I was switching from an operator to a board director, or maybe it was my own personal insecurity that I felt like, I was the only female board director on an all-male, partially all-Mormon board, right? So it was a double whammy.
That's been interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know, but thank goodness I finally learned that, right? So, yeah,
Okay.
I think it was probably the narrative. It was probably how I put it forth.
All right, who wants to ask the last question? Yes.
Thanks so much for the really interesting session. My question is, I'm curious to know a little bit more about what the most functioning, most best working boards that you ever sort of sat in. And if you can break that down into a few different pieces of criteria, characteristic, would be super interesting to know.
I think that the evolution of the JetBlue board over time became a well-governed board to a certain degree. And I will say, honestly, 3 people we all turned out after 15 years at the same time, and now look what they did with Spirit, right? So, but I would say now my Nutanix board, honestly, and because I was able to craft the governance, the strategy, pick the board directors. I mean, when I arrived at Nutanix, we still had 4 years post-IPO, 3 VCs on the board, had all exited out. What the heck were they doing on the board, right? But now I feel like we have incredible board members from a very diverse set of skills that we work together as a team at the board level on all levels, right? Our committees have goals every year in terms of what we're trying to achieve. We have developed a first-time CEO who has never been a CEO before. working to help develop that CEO. And so I feel that of all the boards I've been on, I feel that's probably the best, and only because I've been a student of board governance for so many years that I knew what worked and hoped what worked would work. And I think the proof is in the pudding now. So.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from listening to this. So thanks for great questions, and thanks for joining us.